You're listening to Foreword, a podcast from faculty at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School, hosted by Michelle Knight, Josh Jipp, Madison Pierce, and James Arcadi. Foreword invites listeners into the mission of Trinity Evangelical Divinity School through conversations with faculty, staff, and guests.
Hello and welcome to Foreword. We are your hosts, Michelle Knight,
James Arcadi,
Madison Pierce,
and Josh Jipp.
It's kind of surreal to be telling you guys that right this moment, we are recording our season finale for our second season. I mean, the last couple of years have totally flown by. It's kind of blowing our minds a little bit. And it's even weirder, team. I mean, I'd love to hear what you guys think, but it's really weird for me to think back on the fact that we have been like forwarding from home for longer than like we were ever forwarding in the studio. Like we did a series, y'all, called Forwarding from Home because we thought it was going to be weird. But
what do we know?
Mm-hmm. We had no idea what was coming. Well, this has been an awesome season. We've had the opportunity to chat with some of our most distinguished professors, to talk to some really impressive and active alumni. We've had the chance to chat with guests who are on campus working with our different centers. Just all in all, we've had time to talk to a lot of different kinds of people doing different work for the kingdom. And today we wanted to take time to sort of reflect on this season and reflect specifically in terms of what it's taught us. I mean, we've always hoped that Foreword was more than just filling airwaves and just talking about what's going on at Trinity. We have always hoped that this would be a formative experience for us and for our listeners as we learn from each other. And so we hope that we can reflect today on what we are doing for the good of the church, for the good of this world. And so let's take a second and kind of reflect on that formation. What has this season taught us? James, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Michelle. And just always a pleasure to chat with my co-hosts here in this venue. I think for me, one theme that I saw kind of emerge out of a number of our interviews and conversations was a focus on like kind of an interdisciplinary approach to what it is that we do as scholars, as professors, as teachers, which I just really appreciate. I think that kind of resonates with me a little bit, and kind of like my approach to my scholarship, maybe being a systematic theologian is kind of by nature an interdisciplinary affair, I guess. But nonetheless, I've just really appreciated that we've been able to have conversations both with our guests and amongst one another. I recall the kind of spotlight episode we did where we were talking about pedagogy, and we were talking about how to think interdisciplinarily. And I just really appreciate that I can chat with an Old Testament scholar, two New Testament scholars here, be a systematician, and like it's not like super weird or awkward, or we don't know what to like say to one another, but we're able to actually have these conversations across these disciplines. And then again, some of our guests were really able to do that as well. I'm thinking about, I really loved interviewing Max Lee, who's at TEDS for the year, part of the Henry Center project. And here's a New Testament scholar, but he's doing this really cool interdisciplinary project with the Henry Center that's bringing in contemporary issues in science. And he's also got this background in ancient philosophy as well, that he's kind of like doing into this kind of cool interdisciplinary mix. And I mean, I just think that's great. And I just love too that this is an environment, a place, TEDS, et cetera, where these kinds of conversations seem to be fairly natural. And I can think of friends or other, institutions where, I don't know, people are more sort of like siloed off into their own disciplinary areas. And it just seems like we're not in silos. We're all kind of wandering around the barnyard. Does that analogy work? I don't know, but we can work together on all these various things.
In that scenario,
go ahead, Michelle.
No, I was going to make a joke and it was going to be so bad. And so please, I'm so sorry I interrupted.
Well, we have to hear it now.
The world needs to know.
I just was going to
give us the joke, Michelle. We're not going to go on until we hear your joke.
I'm so sorry, everyone, that I almost took this from you.
No, I can't believe I interrupted. Now I don't even know that the joke was fully formulated. So like now it's just the worst. But I just wanted to assign everybody a barnyard animal because of James's analogy. See, please take over, Madison. I beg you.
I don't know. Kind of seeing myself through your eyes as a barnyard animal would be really meaningful for me. So
you would be the best of them all, I assure you.
Where I thought you were going, Michelle, was I don't know if you remember in one of our episodes where we read a children's book together, the Mo Willems. Do you remember that?
I do.
Okay, so there's also this little kids book that I don't know if you're familiar with called The Barnyard Dance.
Sure, of course I know that.
That's what I thought you were gonna. That's where I thought you were going. So
of course I was going to show the book. Well, all of that brilliance aside, now I really want to know what Madison had to say.
Beats me. No, I mean, I'm definitely a Sandra Boynton stan. If that makes it
easier. It is.
I meant related to James's comment.
This is so a certain demographic right now.
I have done a terrible thing. I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. As far as interdisciplinary reflections, I mean, I think that we have seen a lot of. We've seen a lot in terms of the integration of kind of theory and practice. And of course, what a lot of our guests have done is to really press those boundaries that we often artificially kind of impose. And so I've been so grateful that we've learned from people who are experts in their field. I think of like Peter Cha, who's just this incredible sociologist, but is obviously so engaged in ministry and is doing these incredible projects with Tianu, with the Hebert Center on multi-ethnic churches and all of that. And I mean, at TEDS, we do think of the kind of integration of systematics and biblical theology as interdisciplinary work. But at the end of the day, I mean, we have, again, that the integration of the practitioners, but also sociologists. We have world-renowned anthropologists, and some of whom you've met so far, listeners, and some of whom we need to introduce you to as soon as possible. So,
yeah. Sure. Yeah, I was thinking very, very similarly in terms of one of the things I love about a divinity school like TEDS is that ultimately, the goal is not just sort of production of knowledge, and therefore, the goal is not just departmental autonomy in terms of, the New Testament has the right way to do things, don't encroach with us, but that really, like, we believe that, the biblical studies folk, the church history, theology, as well as sociologists, anthropologists, people studying world Christianity, the PT, right, we are all together trying to build something because our task is ultimately to know God, to make him known, and to live out those realities in our lives and in our communities. So that's one of the things that's like so attractive to me about TEDS and divinity schools like it is it's not just production of knowledge, but it's ultimately believing we're better together. And I love some of the questions that people are asking that are, Max Lisa, and his work at the Henry Center, I think is a great example. We're all motivated in some ways out of our desires for the good or for pleasure, but what are ways that maybe we're being falsely formed by going after certain kinds of pleasures, and what are joys and pleasures that God has intended for us to be formed in good ways that honor him. So I think we could go through almost, I think of David Louis and sort of what he was talking about in terms of working together with the Old Testament and theology and church history to be able to say, how do we read the Psalms and how do we read them well? Almost our whole list, I think, of our interviewees, people that we interviewed were in many ways, touching on that. So, how about you, Michelle? What do you think?
Well, I've just found that I was appreciating, especially in that interview with David Louis, that he admitted it's really difficult to do interdisciplinary work of any kind. I imagine, I was recently talking to a colleague at Gordon Conwell, and she was talking about how there are so many interpretive cruxes and there are so many theological problems we come and practical issues, like how do we actually do this? And the analogy she used was like rolling out Play-Doh, because she's a mom, and so I can like really get behind this analogy. But she was talking about rolling out Play-Doh, and like when you flatten the Play-Doh in one place, it like pops up in another. And she said so much of the time when we're solving problems, we're determining where we're comfortable with the bump being. because there's almost always going to be a bump in our limited ability to totally comprehend God. And I feel like when we have these interdisciplinary conversations, we're all comfortable with different bumps. And it's just helpful for me to see that like we are all really striving to understand a God beyond comprehension. But man, it is really helpful to see where my bumps are more problematic than I realize and help somebody else recognize their own bumps. So I don't know. I've found comfort in being like, hey, this is hard. We're gonna work on it together. But ultimately, we're going to sit back and realize that God has plenty more to teach us. So it's a humbling enterprise, I think.
Yeah.
Madison, what about you? How has this season started to form you and make you think about things?
Yeah. I mean, of course, my reflections on the season are really integrated with what my own personal experiences have been and kind of reflections over this hard year. But I've loved hearing from some of our colleagues who have been here. I mean, I think so often when I went to prepare for the interview and realized that one of our colleagues had been here since the 90s, since I was redacted years old, that was just really, really striking to me and really important. And so for me, one, as somebody who is exhausted and has had a difficult year and really needs a break, in part because of like the hard work that I've been trying to do in advocating for students and advocating for minoritized communities and things like that. So, I'm like a lot of us, especially as white Christians who, are trying to be more intentional in the past year. And we're really tired. But then we realize that our brothers and sisters from those communities have been fighting this exact fight, and they're not surprised when X happens or Y happens or Z happens.
Yeah.
But we're finally paying more attention. And so, one, it's lamenting that that's the case for me. But then also, trying to follow in their example of endurance and perseverance in a way that that works, and also trying to figure out like ways of self-care and advocacy that are meaningful for me. So,
yeah. I mean, what you're saying reminds me a little bit of our conversation with Pastor Sandra Van Opstal and the quickness with which she was talking about how her own at times exhaustion or anger or frustration when she sees things in the world and things, quite frankly, that are in the church that are not right, and there are the texts from Amos and elsewhere that are really just, Jeremiah, deep resources for her to, bring her prayers of disappointment and lament and anger to God. But
Well, and I was really touched by the episode with Dr. Steve Roy, when he started talking about lament. I don't lament well. I am one of those stereotypical white Christians who's really bad at it. And because of that, I imagine there's a huge disconnect with certain communities and certain people that I interact with because I don't always share in their lament well, nor do I acknowledge my own stuff that I need to lament. But he shared a story that's just been, I haven't been able to shake it. He shared a story about a young couple who had lost a child, and they really had trouble participating in church for a long time because it wasn't a place where they felt like where they were was understood. And it was so celebratory. It felt like insincere for them to worship there. And I haven't been able to shake that. Just thinking about whether it's someone with a certain life experience or someone from a certain community, just whether our churches are places where they feel like their life experience is understood, and just how monolithic sometimes our churches can be, not only in the faces that are represented there, but in the way we do things. And so that's been really challenging for me as I reflect on my part in my churches and my part in the community at TEDS and things like that. My goodness, I sincerely hope that we all are working hard to make it a place where people from all of these different walks of life really do feel understood. And that's, as Madison, as you said, you've been engaged in this work, and it's hard work. And I'm grateful for examples like yours and other people on our campus who are pushing us all to think about that more clearly.
I'm really good at being a bummer, so yeah.
A delightful bummer.
maybe Michelle, I can just pick up that theme a little bit, because what I was thinking about, what Madison was reflecting on here with respect to endurance or kind of faithfulness and what have you. I too was really struck by by Steve Roy's reflections, and on a different note, kind of his discussion of standards of success and failure. I think that's one issue, or one way how I can tend to lose endurance or lose faithfulness, is to have my ideas of what is successful get skewed and get skewed by contemporary 21st century North American conceptions of what success is. But his sort of like call to be faithful to God's calling, and to see that as the focus, and to not use as your rubric some kind of other, evaluative criteria other than what God is calling you to do. I suppose that just really encouraged me to focus more directly on the mission that I guess I feel like God is calling me. And I think that kind of, encourages more of this sort of faithfulness or endurance in the midst of difficulties and challenges. So, I really appreciate that word from Steve. And that's one that's going to be sticking with me for a while, I think.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What about you, Josh, as you reflect on the season, and what has it taught you? What are you thinking about?
Yeah, I think, when I was reflecting back on our different guests and our conversations, I think one of the things that I continue to think about is just how important it is for us to keep learning from all of our brothers and sisters that are following Jesus. So I loved being able to talk with Charlie Dates and Sandra Van Opstel, and I loved being able to hear the episode from Max Lee, and so many others. But basically, in terms of how their theologies and their preaching is formed in so many ways within the lived experience of their churches and their communities. And, I think for me, a lot of this started, honestly, when I was an MDiv student at TEDS, and God started to give me, I hope, a little bit of humility to realize that that I and my church and background didn't have, while it brought good things to the table, wasn't the exclusive or singular right way for understanding God and God's work in this world. So I think, those conversations just continue to challenge me to be asking the questions: are my eyes open to the world that we're living in? Do I believe that the scriptures are really addressing the pains and the joys and, the lived realities that make up our world? So, I don't know. I could say in so many ways, I'm hungry for the kind of preaching and teaching that some of those guests really embody, as they do have their eyes open to Asian American racism or the experiences of immigrants on the west side of Chicago, and are reading the scriptures and drawing upon the scriptures really to address those kinds of lived realities. I just loved having the chance to hear how the scriptures are alive, in the teaching and in the preaching of so many of our guests. So,
yeah. I felt that way as we were chatting with Gene Green way at the beginning of the season, when he was pushing us to realize just how much kind of our theological conceptions were being shaped by the West and the Western tradition. And he was working on so many projects, not just kind of in a token way, including voices from communities in the majority world, but actually like letting them shape the way that theological conversations were being had, and participating in those conversations on the ground there. I felt like Gene reminded me that like I need to be a guest in settings as opposed to the host. Mm-hmm. And I need to be listening to stories because I do feel like a lot of times in our spaces, those voices that aren't dominant are often they're considered guests, like in my syllabus or in somebody else's syllabus or whatever. It's just like, a voice that isn't from the majority culture in the white American church. And rather than us kind of like entering into the conversation that's shaped by somebody else's questions that are really different than my own. So I've been really grateful for the way this season has pushed me to think of other questions. Yeah. Like my framework is shaped by my experience to an extent where I'm just like missing the breadth of what God has to teach me.
Michelle, I'm glad you brought up Gene Green's episode. I kind of forgot that was one that we did at the very beginning because it seems like it was like 8 years ago or something like that. Yeah. Like, who remembers that far away? But I think that was a great point that you brought up there, and he really exemplified a lot of that sort of like hospitality and openness to all these different approaches and cultures. And he's also like one of the most interesting people I've ever had a chance to have a conversation with. There's so many memes of like the life experience that he's had. So that was thanks for reminding me of that. And I think, kind of one of the things that stands out for me in relation to this theme that you bring up here, Josh, with respect to, listening to others and kind of keep learning, is I've just really so appreciated hearing a lot of like the biographical material from our guests. Sometimes maybe I might have a tendency to sort of see someone just as an academic, and I just look at them from their, their writing or whatever it is they teach or what have you. But just hear like where people came from and their educational experiences, their ministerial experiences. I'm going to come back to Max Lee's talk there too, and just hearing about him growing up in, Korean American churches in Northern California, then down in Southern California, places I know a little bit, and just kind of, seeing how those experiences of his upbringing shaped how he approaches his task right now. And I just love seeing that, how it is that our histories, our context, whatever, influences then the ideas that we're excited about right now that we want to share with the world, and that we keep researching. So I love these little biographical bits that we get of our guests as we then dig into the issues that they're excited about right now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I loved, we haven't mentioned Harold Netlin, but, we heard a lot about Harold's experiences in Japan. I know it was really striking for me to hear about Peter Cha's experience of the LA riots and how formative that was for him, and his kind of understanding of multi-ethnic ministries and stuff. And obviously, hearing about our alumni like Pastor Van Opstal and Reverend Dr. Dates, like their experiences at TEDS even, were so meaningful. That's something that I really love, that aspect. And then also some of what you were highlighting, Michelle, about being a listener. That's one of the things, just to give a plug to Mosaic on campus. But that's just such an incredible feature of that, is a lot of times the speakers are invited to share, a lot of their kind of personal background. And I've just learned so much. That includes our students. And so that's been a space that has really helped me to love and appreciate TEDS, and to see the incredible students that we bring in. My goodness, if those students are any indication of the like leaders of the church tomorrow, then we do have something beautiful on the horizon. So I've really appreciated that, and I've been learning so much.
Well, I guess I should reflect on the season too at this point. One of the kind of themes that, was really fun for me to explore this season was we talked a little bit more about teaching and pedagogy in several of the episodes, especially, and that kind of, Dana started us in that direction kind of toward the beginning of the season, helping us to think about how we teach it and why that's important and things like that. And even on Twitter, some people started asking more questions about teaching. And it suddenly it's occurred to me over the season, as we've had these different professors on, like Lawson Younger and President Perrin, talking about the different ways that they conceive of their vocation as a professor and scholar. And I think it was actually Dr. Abernethy, Andy, one of our alumni, he said it best, I think. He talked about how God shaped each of us to be different kinds of scholars and different kinds of professors. And while I think we all know that, it was neat for me to kind of reflect on exactly what the implications of that were this season. And to think about, for example, like we often talk in the church about how we all have these different spiritual gifts that we bring, and they come together to, build the body of Christ. But in the academy, that is just as true as a subset of the body of Christ. There are certain professors, and I'm not even talking about pedagogical approach, but some of us bring a comfort with lament, like Steve and Madison. Some of us bring incredible pastoral care. I'm thinking also of Steve, but even the way that Harold interacts with students. I'm thinking about like how some people, like both Nick, President Perrin, and Lawson, really highlighted how important it is to them to engage with like the academy at large and the secular academy and have a presence there so that we can not only be respected in those conversations, but have an impact on them. We can actually shape those conversations meaningfully. And so it's just been neat to hear different people encourage us to think about how our unique vocation here can really have a huge impact on the church and on the different students who come with different passions and different interests and things like that. I mean, Andy, every time I hear him talk, I think about how much more comfortable an athlete would be in Andy's class than in my class. Just with the analogies I use and the things I'm passionate about. And I'm just grateful. I'm grateful that God has given us those different gifts, and it's fun to watch how they play out.
That's really cool, Michelle. Thanks for sharing that. Maybe on the kind of pedagogical theme there as well, and perhaps kind of combining a couple of things in my mind. I think one thing that has struck me in some of these interviews wherein there was perhaps a pedagogical focus or one where sort of classroom engagement was present is just like the relationality between teacher and student, and just call it even like the love between the teacher and the student for in these kind of environments that seems just kind of exude from a number of our colleagues, and one that's been encouraging me as well. And when we think about what it is to teach, what it is to be in an educational environment like a seminary, really at the core of that, I think, is this teacher-student relationship there, professor-student relationship, and any kind of like knowledge transfer or, skills acquisition or what have you is really just sort of, I think, secondary or kind of rides on the back of this, relational encounter between us and our students. And I feel like I kind of like think that, or I have that maybe like, implicitly kind of in my mind, but sort of to see this come out in the ways in which our colleagues were speaking about their approach to the pedagogical text, I think has been really, encouraging me to kind of want to continue to foster that in my own sort of approach to what goes on in the classroom or outside the classroom too, in terms of the relationality with our students. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, in a sense, that's one of the harder things that we've experienced this year because our relationships are in a lot of ways shifted or changed or whatever. But I have no doubt that there are students that I haven't been able to connect with in the same way as I would have if we had been, taking a water break and, I had the chance to say, hey, what's going on with you? But I do feel like I've still been able to have those kind of meaningful connections, especially with those who have come to office hours. I don't know if Zoom, if being in their own space, it just enables them to, just kind of settle a little bit. But I have enjoyed that. And certainly still, I mean, shout out to my exegesis sequence over the past year. We've been on Zoom for a lot, and we do it in the evenings on Tuesday, and they've been so fun. It's not like we're not having a good time. So that's really nice. But certainly looking forward to additional connections with them and stuff. So I don't know. I feel like I had something else I was going to say, but I lost it. So.
Yeah, I don't have much to add. I think except, to basically reaffirm the many different episodes where even if it wasn't always the point of the conversation, the professors, the pastors, the scholars that were there were just so obviously demonstrating that they do what they do, not only because they love the subject matter, which we all do, but just because they love people. And Andy Abernathy is just like you. Did Madison? You had him as a professor for a little bit. You too, Michelle, or just Matt?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I remember
you.
It's like he so clearly just attends to and pays attention to the people that are in his class. And Peter's episode too. I mean, anyone that hears Peter talk one time or Steve. I mean, all of them. Really, it's like it doesn't take long, even if they're not talking about pedagogy per se, to get a sense that they love their students and they see them and are listening to them and paying attention to them. So I think we just continue to need more and more faculty that are like that, and just all of us to keep reminding ourselves of the importance of transformation really often coming out of relationships. So yeah, thanks, James.
It's good you can muster some reflections on teaching despite your research leave, Josh.
I think I remember doing that once.
Wow. Well,
you have something else I need to... Okay.
No, it's me. I think that probably brings us to a good conclusion now that we've finally gotten a chance to rib Josh. So that's just the foreword. We hope that you've enjoyed these reflections about what we've learned this season in our conversations with our faculty colleagues and our inspiring TEDS alumni. That's a wrap for our second season, but we'll see you again soon. As always, I'm Madison Pierce.
And I'm Josh Jipp.
I'm Michelle Knight.
I'm James Arcadi.
Foreword is a podcast hosted by faculty at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. The views expressed by the hosts and guests of Foreword do not necessarily represent the views of Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. You can subscribe to our newest episode on your preferred podcast app or at forewordpodcast.com. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Foreword Podcast to get updates and additional links to content. Trinity Evangelical Divinity School is located 25 miles north of Chicago with extension sites across the country and online. Trinity educates men and women to engage in God's redemptive work in the world by cultivating academic excellence, Christian faithfulness, and lifelong learning. You can find more information at teds.edu.